Hi, all dear listeners. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. I'm joined this time by Commissioner Kelvin Lee, Commissioner at the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines, SEC. It's my absolute pleasure and honor to host you today, Kelvin.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for having me. No, I'm excited to be on this podcast.
Well, I'm excited as well to be able to speak with you. I know you have a very busy schedule, so you taking time for this, it's highly appreciated.
No, I'm happy to make time for you. Please.
And no, I mean, well, I think we should start maybe like from the very beginning, you know. And I know that my listeners always like to know more about whoever I invite, you know.
Hmm.
And so in this case, I'm sure they will want to know more about you. For example, about your personal journey. If you could please share a bit about that. What made you decide to work in the areas you've been working? Anything that you can share with them?
Okay. Just so my name's Kelvin. I'm Kelvin Lee. I am an incumbent commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines. I don't really like the title commissioner. I find it too long. No, so I prefer to be called simply Kelvin or Attorney Kelvin. I worked harder for the attorney title, I think. uh, um, um, as commissioner, I actually oversee a number of regulatory functions here in the Philippines. No? In particular, I focus now on capital markets, fintech, sustainable finance, IT, and international affairs. But a lot of the work now is on the fintech space, obviously, because of all the innovations that are happening, all the new business that are starting up. And I became a commissioner. I came from government. I was a former assistant secretary in the office of the president years back. Prior to that, I was in private sector. No, but despite my short government service in the office of the president, I was always very very interested in the capital markets, in technology and innovations. So I guess one thing led to another. You know, I took a number of training sessions with the University of Cambridge on fintech, and it was through my learnings there that I started getting more involved and actually supervise and help push for the creation of something we call the Philly FinTech Innovation Office. Essentially, it's an innovation hub here at the SEC. I'm also now, because of my fintech focus, working on multiple regulations to work on the fintech industry here in the Philippines.
Mhm. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you now about two things that you mentioned. First of all,
Mhm.
given that many of my listeners are more perhaps on the tech side rather than the fin one, the finance one, I wanted
Uh-huh.
to ask you first of all, if you could please share what's the SEC? You know, I mean, what are
Mhm.
its main functions and purposes, and anything that you can share in case they don't know what it is.
Okay. Well, the SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission. We are patterned after the U.S. SEC. No, we were with the United States for a long time, so a lot of our government institutions are based on some of the government institutions at the U.S. And in particular, the Philippine SEC is unique in the sense that we're a capital market securities regulator, so we're on the finance side. We're also the company registrar, so anyone who wants to incorporate, create the company, do business in the Philippines has to register with us also in the Philippines. Now, on the tech side, on the tech and fintech side, the reason the SEC is so involved here now is because there's of course certain discussions on the treatment of cryptocurrencies, digital assets, whether or not they're considered securities, and of course whether or not they would then fall under the purview of a securities regulator such as ourselves. Of course, Professor, you're aware that that debate is largely unresolved, no,
Yes,
and it's a touchy one.
it's a complicated one indeed.
Yeah, it's a very complicated one. But the fact remains is that at least from the perspective of government at this stage, it is something we need to look at and regulate. It's a question of how to regulate it, how carefully, how strictly. Currently, I personally try to advocate that we want to invite innovations. We want to invite these fintech companies to operate. So we encourage them, but of course, with a very careful caveat that do it within the sphere of our regulations. And at the same time, we try to make sure that there's a how do we say this? No, that we're not being prohibitive, that we're trying not to block any of these major innovations, major companies from coming in. No? Of course, it's a very delicate balancing act. Of course, the balance between innovation, tech, and and our mandate, no, as a primary regulator, it's always a very, very difficult one. But at the end of the day, I'd like to think we're still doing well in the sense that a lot of companies still come to the Philippines. We're actually one of the more popular hubs currently when it comes to fintech and investments. At least within ASEAN. So I'd like to think we're doing something right now. The SEC and my counterpart agency, the central bank, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
Nice. No, I mean, regulations are, of course, a very important topic. I myself come from a legal background, and I know that talking about regulations in these new areas, new technologies, is always complicated because we know that the law tends to go slower than these new technologies. I mean, we saw that with artificial intelligence, for example. No, I know that in the European Union, for example, right now, there are some debates about how to regulate ChatGPT, for example, and these newer technologies. So I definitely want to discuss this later. But before getting there, when you were telling me about your personal journey, you mentioned as well the Philly FinTech Innovation Office as part of the SEC or created by the SEC. So if you could please share a bit more about this innovation office, like when or why was it created, and what is this office doing exactly, to promote fintech in the Philippines, or etc.
Yeah, well, essentially, the idea of the FinTech Innovation Office stems from the concept we learned when I was taking up that course at the University of Cambridge. There's a course there that's directed to regulators, no, through the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance. So I was part of the pioneer cohort way back in 2019. So I was literally a guinea pig for that particular course. And one of the things that I picked up from that course, that online course, was on the debate between regulatory sandboxes and innovation offices, innovation hubs. And what we gathered from that discussion is that because of the cutting edge nature of fintech, of a lot of these fintech innovations, there is a need for a dedicated office to work on it, to focus on it, to help guide the regulatory leadership like myself, no, the commissioners are up on how to move forward in this space. So that's what we did. We created the FinTech Innovation Office. We call it the Philly FinTech because in the Philippines, we like puns here. So Philly FinTech Innovation Office. And precisely their focus is to try and encourage innovation, to try and be welcoming to new innovation. Now, to be clear, they're not the regulatory side of things, meaning if you're going to come in, you're going to register your company. It is not the Philly FinTech's office job to do that. The Philly FinTech's office job is to, if ever, to receive such applications, guide them on some of the issues through informal steers, what we call informal steers, among others, guide them on how to move forward on a quote unquote informal, non-binding nature. And guide these companies who are coming into the Philippines where to go, what to do, and what things they can do, in terms of registration. I have also recently mandated them to be able to do sandboxes. So this is the team now that's working on a set of regulatory sandbox rules that we will come out. And this year, I'm hoping to be able to pioneer some what do you call this? Some open finance frameworks. Sorry, open finance technologies to be implemented for some of our regulated entities. Because, Prof, just in case you didn't know, lending and financing companies fall under the SEC and not the central bank here in the Philippines. So it's a very unique situation. So it's a very odd situation, actually. But as a result of which, we want to roll out open finance for them as well, no? For non-bank financial institutions like lending and financing, so NBFIs. So that's the direction we're looking at. Bottom line, the Philippine Tech Innovation Office is supposed to be our front-facing entity to be able to answer your initial queries and to be able to be like the spokesperson for fintech-related matters for the commission. They're supposed to be at the forefront of that. So that's their primary. It's still a small office, unfortunately. There's always challenges whenever you try to scale up a new office. But I'd like to think that they're operating well. They're actually quite busy, because of all the invitations to meet them, to speak to them, and then to hear how to move forward. So that's essentially the FinTech Innovation Office now. It's patterned, by the way, Prof, if I may, before we created that office, we had a meeting with representatives from the UK FCA, who also created an innovation hub. So we patterned our Philippine Tech Innovation Office largely to the innovation hub of FCA.
I see. That's very interesting. I mean, it's great to see this kind of initiatives, and especially as we said before, in areas which tend to be well difficult to regulate, and this is why I wanted to discuss with you now regulations. I know, or I read that the SEC, well, we're looking to tap experts from universities, UP Law Center, for example, to craft policies on cryptocurrencies, digital assets. And this is indeed a complicated area, as we said before, no? Because, I mean, there are many possible ways to regulate this. We know that certain countries opted for prohibition, whereas others are completely free, to the point that we know that there are a couple of countries in the world which even adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, as weird as it may sound, no? So the thing is, I mean, the range of possibilities is very wide in this area, no? So I guess it's up to each country in the end to decide which approach they want, depending on many factors, right? So I wanted to ask you, what is the current regulation in the Philippines of digital assets? And not just digital assets, but also after that, if you could summarize like FinTech in general, no? I mean, any other area that you wanted to highlight, such as AI, open banking, whatever you want to share, so my audience can get to know a bit more about the Philippines from this regulatory perspective.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Clarification, Prof, very quickly. The UP Law Center, which we have partnered with, is supposed to give us research findings on particular topics that we. I won't mention the particular topics in the meantime, because that's supposed to be private initially. But they are not the ones drafting the regulations for us. We have a team that's working on it here within the FinTech office, which has been trained by University of Cambridge. I understand they're getting some capacity building on open finance and banking as well from the World Bank, among others. They're also getting some technical assistance from the ADB. So there is a team that's focused on drafting what we're calling the digital asset offering rules and the digital asset exchange rules. So those two sets of rules will deal with the different permutations when it comes to digital assets. One of which is the digital asset side, so the cryptocurrency side, and then the other is the digital asset exchange side, meaning the entity, the self-regulatory organization or SRO, that's supposed to be where these items are traded. Take note that these rules, the way we're crafting it and the way we're looking at it, is going to be separate from the VASP rules, or the Virtual Asset Service Provider rules, created and issued by the Central Bank of the Philippines, the BSP, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So looking forward, the direction is that any cryptocurrency platform would have to be registered both with the SEC and with the BSP, depending on the functions or the services they will be offering. But that's how we're envisioning. Similar to how we currently regulate banks. Banks are regulated as a bank and as a publicly listed company, so under the SEC as well. So that's the general direction we're going with. Now, as to the history of that draft, just so you're aware, the draft has been undergoing major changes for the last 2 years, and we actually circulated an initial draft back in 2020, but we ran into some problems. For instance, in 2020, we had that whole issue with COVID, right? So it was difficult getting the draft out, and then by the time we kind of got used to it, we kind of got to be ready to work on the rules again, and then to issue it out. There were so many changes in the space. We were worried that the rules that was drafted initially circa 2019, 2020 would no longer reflect reality. So we kept on making changes, trying to adjust to the times. And we are in fact ready. I was ready to launch it last year, in late 2022. I think Q3, Q4. I actually was holding the draft, and there was an event in the Philippines called the Philippine Blockchain Week, where I was supposed to announce. I was asked to do a keynote. I was supposed to announce the issuance of those drafts for public comment and public consultation during that particular event. But that was around the time the FTX, of course, you know the FTX thing. You know what happened there. It was an example of very without naming names. It was an example of very open regulation, causing a bit of a crack, no, in the setup. So without criticizing my counterparts there, the direction at that point was, okay, not to release the draft, have it go over some changes again because of FTX. And it was hilarious because my staff had already prepared my keynote along the theme of announcing the draft. But since we came to a decision to pull out the draft just the night before that keynote, I had to draft a whole new keynote by myself because it was so late already, and give the speech early the next day at 9 a.m. It was hilarious. So anyway, the draft now, the digital asset offering, digital asset exchange draft, is undergoing revisions, and as I understand it, it's supposed to it's supposed to be released this quarter. No, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know if you've been monitoring. The IOSCO came out with crypto asset rules and guidance just this
Mhm.
week. So so it goes back to another point as okay, we need to make sure it's aligned again. So now we're forced to push it back again just to make sure that it aligns with what IOSCO is issuing out.
Yes.
So this is an example of a set of rules that just going through such a long evolution that I'm actually kind of I want to issue it out, but I got to make sure that it stays relevant, because every time we getting these changes, it gets to be a challenge. No, but um, anyway, I'm hoping this is the last part of it, the last part of the changes. Hopefully, once we're able to accommodate the requirements of the IOSCO crypto asset regulations, guide regulations that came out this week, um, I'm looking to hopefully issue the finally issue these digital asset offering, digital asset exchange rules, quarter 3. No, just to give us some room to make sure everything is aligned. If not quarter 3 this year, quarter 4 maybe, but certainly, I want this out this year. No?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think the supranational nature of these assets, plus how fast everything changes, makes this all much more difficult. You mentioned now
yes,
FTX, and I don't want to
mm.
talk about that because it was very messy, of course. I
Yeah.
mean, so it's not to blame this or that, but I remember related to this that I think FTX happened in mid-November, the collapse, and it was just after the Hong Kong FinTech Week, and I participated in that event as a speaker, as a panelist, and I was actually discussing how to regulate virtual assets, no? And
Mm.
I remember that some people said that after Terra and Luna in May last year, they thought that nothing that big would happen. People, people I did networking with, and in the end, like
Mm.
1 week later, FTX happened. So I think bottom line is you always need to be prepared because you never know what's going to happen. And so I mean, no
Correct.
matter how prepared you are, I know that things can happen anyway, but at least I think it's what you said. No, it's all about keeping the relevance of the regulations as much as possible in order to, I think, prevent as much as possible.
Yes. Yes. Because don't forget, at the end of the day, regulators like myself, we have to take into consideration not just keeping an open mind, no, keeping an open mind to innovations. We also have to be very careful about the risks of new innovations, whatever risk they might cause, not just to investor protection, not just to investors, but also to the financial system. No, the prime example is FTX. If you recall, there were some statements at the time when it collapsed that it might affect the broader financial system as a whole because everyone was so leveraged in relation to that. So that is exactly what we don't want. We don't want whatever new innovation that comes in. At least I can speak for the Philippines. Now, we don't want whatever new regulations that come into the Philippines. Sorry, whatever new innovations come into the Philippines to cause damage or risks to our financial stability. I mean, we are a relatively small economy compared to other big countries. So, in theory, um, it could actually be a little bit easier to destabilize us. One big collapse could actually cause a very difficult effect on us, and we don't want that. We want to make sure our financial system, our economy here in the Philippines stays stable, stays safe, stays robust if possible. So that's why sometimes we are sometimes criticized for being a little too careful. But I would like to think that in light of the fact of the heavy responsibilities we have, you can't blame regulators for sometimes erring on the side of caution. No?
Of course, of
At this
course.
stage, actually, just balancing the two is very hard. No? Keeping open to innovations, but still, always making sure that it will not cause any instability. So it's very hard. It's very hard
No, I think it makes
keeping
perfect
that.
sense. I mean, I think that companies are already like bold enough, no, when tech
Mm.
companies especially, because it's up to them to create these new technologies and try to implement them. So I think it makes sense for regulators to be cautious because if you're not cautious, who's going to be cautious? No, so I think it makes perfect sense.
Correct. Correct.
And
Exactly.
I also read that you published an article, I think it was in the Manila Times, where
Yeah.
you stated that the SEC was looking into best practices that it can adopt from EU's regulations when it comes to AML, CFT. So I
Mm,
wanted to ask you, you know that these new regulations in Europe, MiCA, have been going through many changes,
mm,
you know, and
mm.
I just wanted to ask you which areas of MiCA you think that would be more interesting for the Philippines to either adopt or at least study more deeply.
Well, on our end, it was the money laundering side that piqued our curiosity, because at the time when I met with my counterparts at the FCA, in the UK, I was on a I think I was slated to give a speech in London. Since I was already there, we were able to meet with our counterparts there, and we spoke of how they would regulate digital assets, cryptocurrencies as well. And they pointed out to us that the FCA, current British regulations. Well, at the time, this is roughly about a year ago. At the time, British regulations in relation to cryptocurrency asset regulation focus on the money laundering side, meaning they used the basic AML framework, anti-money laundering framework, and then applied it to cryptocurrency asset regulation. So that's how they were doing it. But that conversation was pre-MiCA, sorry. So meaning it with the way they were doing it at the time, they hadn't been taking into consideration MiCA yet. But on the point of MiCA, to be very honest, I have only browsed through it, so I can only talk to you about the broad strokes of it. But certainly, one thing that has been consistent about it would be the treatment in relation to securities and securitization. Now, in effect, the securitization and crypto assets, it goes back to the point that it looks like it has to be regulated by not only the securities regulator but also the other financial regulators. So this goes back to my point, and because this was a touchy topic for me a few years back, when people would say that technically we don't have to regulate it because technically our jurisdiction on this is questionable. But I would think the way the MiCA law is worded now, that kind of confirms that discussion, no? That clearly we have jurisdiction, or entities similar to us clearly have jurisdiction over these things, no? So that's one aspect that has been important to me on that point, no? But you know what another thing that's coming from the EU that I've been monitoring a little more closely than MiCA, because we already have our working framework, so the MiCA wasn't such a problem for me, is the AI regulations. I've been informed that there are AI regulations coming up, which is interesting because now we're looking at at least me, we're looking at regulating robo advisories, because there have been multiple submissions in relation to robo advisory firms, robo advisory services here in the Philippines. That's something we're looking to issue out this year as well. No, a set of regulations that focuses on how to regulate robo advisories and the artificial intelligence that underpins this technology. So it is also top of mind. The other forms of AI, I'm not so sure we would be the ones to regulate it properly. For instance, Chat GPT would not exactly fall under us, not unless Chat GPT continues to give, well, financial advice, I guess, among other things. But certainly AI is as well top of mind. Interesting enough, I was just interviewed as well yesterday by another newspaper on the concept of AI, and I also explained that that's something that needs to be regulated, in particular on the robo advisory and the financial advice side. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, no, of course it does. And it's nice that you mentioned AI, because it's a very hot topic. And I know the European Union is looking into regulating this more intensely. I mean, I remember that I think it was a couple of years ago, I wrote an academic paper about how interesting and relevant it would be to create a regulatory sandbox for black box AI applications. And I remember that paper was cited in some European Parliament sessions, but well, in the end, I think that not much was done after that. But I know that now, after ChatGPT and everything, they are trying or looking into regulating this much more intensely. So let's see what happens. But for sure, there's going to be a lot of debate, not just in the EU, but worldwide when it comes to AI, because I know that the technology has been there for very long. But I think these last few months and ChatGPT becoming so mainstream has, to some extent, caught many people off guard. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all evolves.
Correct. In fact, if I may, Prof, about last year, actually, the whole thing about AI was brought to my attention late last year, because I was at a panel with, I don't know if you're familiar with Sophia, the robot.
Yes.
There's Sophia the robot. I'm not sure how I wound up on a panel with her. It was a corporate law panel, I think, corporate law and technology panel here in the Philippines. But somehow she was on the panel with me virtually, and the way she was speaking, I remember thinking, wow, if this is and I understand she's one of the early designs of the AI, so meaning she's one of the prototypes. If this is one of the prototypes and she's already able to speak that intelligently, and this was before ChatGPT really came out, that implied something already about AI. It looks like it really is the wave of the future. Um, I also recall there was some sort of odd submission given to me about the AI being able to perform functions of a board, of a member of the board, sit on the board of a company. And I understand there's some sort of company, there's some sort of investment company that already uses an AI as a board member in Hong Kong. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. No. So certainly this intersects with the work I'm doing. No, emphasizes to me AI is here. It's entering the financial space as well. Clearly something needs to be done in relation to regulating it. Precisely why it's likely we will come out with AI rules. I'm just hesitating to use the term AI in the rules or the framework itself. So we're still looking at how to couch that. No, but certainly it is something we're looking at and focusing on as well.
Yes, actually, I remember that I think that Sophia was invited as a panelist, I think in the Hong Kong FinTech Week in 2020, maybe, so a while ago, I would say 3 years ago. And I remember I was watching this panel, and it was actually quite shocking because, as you said, it's a prototype, but seeing a prototype being so advanced makes you think that, about two things at least. I thought about, one, the potential of this technology, of course, the potential is huge, but at the same time, perhaps it's because my mind is a bit twisted by the fact of coming from a regulatory background, but I thought as well about all the potential regulatory issues that might appear in the future. No? And I think that's something the regulators in the future will need to deal with, especially, as you said, in your case, when it affects financial advice, etc.
Correct. Completely agree.
And I wanted to talk now to you about financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is an area that has always been of much interest to me because I think it's one of the most interesting areas or use cases of fintech, in the sense that, of course, I think that making payments faster or cheaper in, let's say, the European Union or the US is interesting. I'm not saying it's not, but I think the big change, the big thing about fintech, to me at least, it comes from thinking of allowing large amounts of unbanked people, either, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, in India, Bangladesh, anywhere, to become banked, to become part of the financial system. I think, to me, that's maybe like step one that fintech needs to address in many ways. So rather than making perhaps my payments like 1% faster now, I think that other parts should be, to me at least, priority. So I wanted to ask you about that. First of all, if you could share with me, because I'm not sure about that, what's the percentage of unbanked people in the Philippines, and how do you think that fintech in the Philippines can help promote financial inclusion, especially in those smaller rural areas, which may be perhaps farther from bank branches or the things that we have in bigger cities?
Well, financial inclusion, of course, is a major point here in the Philippines. So there's actually a financial inclusion. I think it's called the Financial Inclusion Coordination Steering Committee, which is an interagency group, no, here in the Philippines, with cabinet secretaries actually sitting on it. So ministers, in effect, no, in other countries that are sitting on it. I sit on it as well, as I understand. It's one of the major points of the financial inclusion initiatives here would be to make sure that everyone, as you mentioned, everyone or most everyone has a bank account. Aside from bank accounts, easy access to funding, easy access to credit, among other things. And based on I think it's a 2021 financial inclusion survey of our central bank, the Banco Central, account ownership of bank accounts increased, I think, to almost 50+% already in 2021, no? Just a few years ago, which is a stark contrast to back in 2019. Back in 2019, I think the percentage of bank ownership, bank account ownership is like maybe 20-30% only. So of course, it's largely driven by the pandemic, I think, no, because obviously everyone had to have a bank account at the time. But certainly this tells you that there is a sizable population here in the Philippines that is now more than willing to try and to have bank accounts through fintech. And I don't think the numbers would have risen so high, meaning the 50+% financial inclusion surveys findings of there being 50+% who have bank accounts now. It wouldn't have risen so high without fintech, because most of these people, they have bank accounts, I think, in some of the digital banks. For instance, here in the Philippines, one of the very aggressive digital banks would be Union Bank, what else? But we have now these Maya banks. Digital banks are a thing now. This helps, I think, in the financial inclusion side, because otherwise they wouldn't have any access to the normal bank accounts anyway. So it's been massive. It's been massive, actually. It's obviously it causes some issues as well for us as regulators trying to keep track of this all, but certainly it's a very active space. And I'm happy to say that the Filipino people has been, well, the Philippines as a whole is a fairly young population, so I think that might have helped in terms of getting the financial inclusion, getting the bank accounts to the number that they are now. In relation to your questions, whether or not the financial inclusion side, whether or not the numbers are affected by the how do we say, the literacy side, no, as I understand it. I correct me if I'm wrong. I might have misunderstood this question, but not everyone, despite the fairly young population, not everyone, of course, understands how to get into the to get into a bank account, how to create a bank account through the cell phone. So, and this is the point where capacity building is important. Financial inclusion programs should include training in relation to this space on how to get onto the how do we say this, to get into these bank accounts. Now, take note that I'm not a banking regulator, so the numbers are not as familiar to me
Mm.
as I would like. However, I am the securities regulator, and I'd like to think one of our newer financial inclusion initiatives includes a sandbox where one of our wallets, we have something called Gcash, which is like an e-wallet here in the Philippines. It's like what's the rough equivalent? It's like Venmo in the in the US. It's
Mhm.
like Kakao. It's like Kakao Pay
Yes, like
in
in
Korea.
Korea.
Right.
Yes.
So right. So we have Gcash here, and one of the recent initiatives that we just allowed, I just approved the sandbox for this a few months back. Um, Essentially, Gcash will now allow stock services, stock brokerage services within the app. And so a Gcash currently has a user base of roughly 30 million people. So now suddenly roughly 30 million people now have access to the stock market, where before they did not have such easy access to the stock market. So I'd like to think that initiatives like that, us allowing initiatives like that, is what helps make financial inclusion a little bit more palatable now moving forward. People now have more access to financial services. People now have more options and availability of investments, no, easily on the phone. And that's the fintech side of things, and I'm very, very happy that we were able to launch that particular sandbox. I think we just allowed them to go into full rollout of services a few weeks ago. And I understand a separate payment channel, without mentioning name, a separate payment channel here in the Philippines wants to do the exact same thing now. So this goes back to my point, no, these
Mhm.
fintechs do help in the financial inclusion side in relation to the services, because then they now allow more access to services that were never available in the first place to or at least not easily available in the first place to the common people here in the Philippines. I'm actually very impressed with the innovation that this particular company Gcash has shown us now in particular.
Mhm. No, I think that's very relevant, and I wanted to ask you like one final question, which is, of course, related to fintech and to some extent to financial inclusion as well. I wanted
Mhm.
to talk to you about central bank digital currencies. I know I know you're not on the central bank, but still, I mean, it's a very interesting topic, at least for me. But I know
Yes, it is.
it can be to some people a controversial one as well, or I mean, perhaps because it's a new one, so many people still don't know very well yet how this is all going to
Mhm.
work in practice. But I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, like, first of all, if you can let me know your take on CBDCs, especially from a regulatory perspective.
Mhm.
And then I think it's very important as well. Perhaps you haven't like regulated this yet properly, but still, if you have like any thoughts about how do you think that should the Philippines have any CBDC in the future or in general, how do
Mhm.
you think that CBDCs can coexist with stable coins? And I'm asking you
Mhm.
that because I remember that last year I co-authored, I co-chaired a report at the Digital Euro Association, which we sent to the European Commission and other
Mhm.
organizations about trying to see how stable coins could fit in the European Union should the European Union have the digital euro in the near future. And I know
Mhm.
there are many overlaps and many opinions. So if you have any
Yes.
thoughts on this, nothing too confidential or anything like that, I know, but any general thoughts?
Well, to be very honest, I have always deferred to the central bank, our Banco Central ng Pilipinas, when it comes to CBDCs, because technically it's not my purview, no, and I hesitate to substitute my opinion for theirs. But that being said, um, there is a lot of room for CBDCs, and I know for a fact that the central banks within ASEAN are speaking to each other about sorting out some sort of interoperability within ASEAN for their respective CBDCs. Now, this goes back to the point that this is government that's working on this. And almost anything that government pushes in a major way, like the CBDCs, is likely to succeed because, well, it's government. No, so people will be forced to use it anyway. So I personally think that these CBDCs will be successful because of that. No, because it's the central banks. The difference, and this is not an isolated thing. Huh? This is not like one central bank doing this. From what I'm hearing, most central banks are going in this direction to the extent that they're talking to each other about interoperability already. So I personally think CBDCs will succeed. Now, whether or not the CBDCs can coexist, I think they can. Whoever will have primacy is what I can't tell at this stage. I personally think, though, that CBDCs will slowly but surely erode the user base of other cryptocurrencies, even stable coins, because at the end of the day, these are backed by central banks. I go back to that point. If the regulator really wants to do something about it, something will happen. Now, will it be the lingua franca? Oh, sorry. Will it be the, not that lingua franca? Will it be the end all or be all when it comes to currencies? That I can't tell, because of course there's always going to be that element of people that want something that's quite not on the system, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
Without, so
Indeed.
so there, I'm sure the cryptocurrencies that are not CBDCs will still be there. Whether or not they'll be as prevalent or as popular as they are now is what I can't say. You know, once the CBDCs really are there. I was asked that a similar question in Hong Kong a few weeks back, I think, a few months back on this point, and I remember saying roughly around the same thing. I think CBDCs will slowly edge out most of the user base of the cryptocurrencies. No? But certainly they will both have to coexist for a while. No? I think it's kind of a I think it's kind of a given.
No, I fully agree. I mean, I think that those hardcore enthusiasts who buy cryptos because they want to trade with them, they will, of course, not switch to CBDCs because I think the purpose is different. But overall, when it comes to using them as a means of payment, it's what you said. No, I mean, whatever has come from the government is much more like official and regulated. I think in the end will prevail, or at least it will be easier to use. No, but I mean, of course, it's very difficult to say because I mean, among many other things, the approach of each country is different, no, depending on how each country wants to regulate this. So, I mean, of course, it's impossible to make any kind of general statement. No? I mean, we can only share thoughts like we did now about what the industry looks like, no, but it's very difficult to foresee anything because you mentioned as well, for example, interoperability, which is a very interesting topic. Many projects like mBridge are looking into interoperability, or the UDPN network, which was launched in Davos in Switzerland this January, are projects that are taking this one step further. But still, I mean, I was talking on my podcast as well with Yifan He, the CEO of Red Day Technology, which is the architect firm behind China's blockchain service network and also part of UDPN. And he told me that even though interoperability will become very important in the future, that project is still maybe like 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead of our time, because if most countries haven't yet launched a CBDC, talking about interoperability between them is something that will come in the future, but not yet. So, of course, I mean, it's very difficult to make any kind of predictions in this industry.
Correct. Especially in an industry as innovative and as fast evolving as this one. Certainly, it's really hard to make predictions. I mean, let's be frank. I mean, a few years ago, we would not have predicted the collapse of some of these entities that just collapsed last year, right? Well, none of us would have expected the crypto winter of this stage as well. So this is such a we're treading on very uncertain grounds, Prof. No, unfortunately.
No, indeed. But I think the industry is becoming much more, the whole fintech industry, not just crypto, much more regulated, institutionalized.
Yes.
And I know some people don't like that, but to me, that's the only possible way forward.
Correct.
Because being on a different level, I mean, you are like on this top level regulating, but sometimes I was like on a much lower level, like advising companies. You realize that, I mean, I'm not talking about scams or anything like that, but you end up realizing that many projects they are bound to fail, because especially when the pandemic started, it seemed like anyone who knew about law and technology perhaps, but didn't have anything to do, they just created their own company, their own coin, their own this, and I mean, I feel there's much more to it than just saying, oh, I'm going to create my coin and start trading this coin. I think it's much more complicated, especially when you are not playing but using people's investment, I mean, people's money. I think they need to be careful. So I mean, I know that something as big as FTX was surprising, but I think that there was a bit of a Wild West vibe in this whole industry. And I think it's important for you regulators to keep regulating this area more intensely, even if enthusiasts from the area may think that this is kind of making the nature of the industry change. I think this is the only way forward. Those are my thoughts.
Correct. We bottom line, government regulators like myself just don't want instability. We don't want violations of investor protection as well. No? Precisely, and we really don't want incidents like FTX happening within our jurisdiction. That was massive violations all over the place. So I guess one thing I'd like people to realize about us regulators is that we're just trying to make sure you're safe. We're just trying to make sure the financial system is safe. So it's not about us being closed-minded about these things. It's about us having to take into consideration your own safety, your own financial safety when it comes to these things. So I hope that message slowly gets across to people when you talk about regulators.
No, it has to. It has to. I remember that just after FTX, this is my final thought. I mean, I remember that I was talking to the CEO of a crypto company from my country, from Spain. And what that person told me because I posted something on LinkedIn, kind of praising, Hong Kong's efforts to regulate this more intensely. And this person told me that that was a mistake, because this was natural selection. He told me, I mean, it was all about the strongest will survive, the weakest will not survive. But I think, for example, that ideas like natural selection cannot be applied to finance. We were talking about financial stability. We were talking about protecting investors. No, this is not like the nature. No, I mean, you can talk about natural selection. You need to talk about protecting everyone who's involved in the industry, and making sure that there's a level playing field that makes you as a retail or wholesale investor feel safe and protected. And I think that's the key. I mean, otherwise it's a mistake, I think, to focus these areas like in that, using that mindset that I know that some people have, but to me it's a wrong one.
Correct. Completely agree with you on that.
And well, unfortunately, Kelvin, we are reaching the end of our episode. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you. We spoke for over 40 minutes about those very interesting topics, and I would like to thank you again for your time and for your valuable insights.
Thank you for having me, Prof. I appreciate it. I apologize if I spoke too much about something. I kind of get heated and passionate about these topics. So I hope at least I was able to get across some major points.
No, sure, no problem.
So, thank you.
That's the idea, to talk as much as possible about these topics, and I think it's all been very, very clear and very relevant for my listeners. So thank you again, and Kelvin, and well, to all my listeners.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
It's been my pleasure, and to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode, and please stay tuned for the next ones. See you, listeners.